Saw the headline in this story and thought we talked a bit about this with Dr. Chris Labos a few weeks back, but it's specifically related to younger people, and it's specifically at that time, as I recall, related to colon cancer and the fact that younger people, typically, who had not gotten the disease, are now being being diagnosed as having colon cancer at higher levels than ever before. And then this particular study, so this comes from the Canadian Medical Association Journal, showing that cancer still remains the leading cause of death in Canada. 250,000 new cancer cases and nearly 90,000 cancer-related deaths in Canada in 2026. And I saw this and thought to myself, I thought we were doing better in preventing deaths from these various different kinds of cancer, but the numbers seem to show otherwise. Dr. Denis Soulières, a hematologist-oncologist and scientific and medical spokesperson for the Canadian Cancer Society, and is on the line. Doctor, thanks for being here this afternoon. Is there an anomaly in these numbers, or what am I not seeing here? Are we not doing better in recognizing cancer or treating cancer?
Well, we have to understand really two facts. So the incidence is the number of new cases. The number of new cases based on the overall population is slightly going down, and has been going down for the last 10 years or so. But it still remains a very frequent diagnosis. The decrease that we saw over the last few years is mainly related to the anti-tobacco laws and prevention programs that have been put forward, so that having fewer people who are smoking leads to a reduction in the number of different types of cancer that are mainly related to the use of tobacco. So we're talking mainly lung cancer, throat cancer, as well as bladder cancer. But we see that there's a decrease as well in other types of cancer, but not all of them. So that's telling us that the prevention that we are doing seems to be doing something, that we are seeing a reduction in the incidence of cancer. In terms of the mortality, though, we see a decrease, but that mortality is decreased because we are able to better screen for cancer, different types of cancer, namely breast cancer and colorectal cancer. And by screening earlier, we're making sure that we're making an earlier diagnosis, and with this earlier diagnosis, having more success at curing this type of cancer. But the last element is also that we are clearly having better types of treatments that we're able to offer. So the science that was done over the last 30 years or so is giving us arms that we can use against cancer that reduce the effect of cancer on mortality. So all three elements are really explaining what we see in the results, but clearly we are not at the end result of our battle against cancer. We are seeing some good effects, but we need to have much more.
So a couple of things in that, again, when you see that number, it's so glaring, 250,000 new cases of cancer, but you're suggesting, as you said just a moment ago, that the number is actually, if we look back 10, 15, 20 years ago, the number is coming down.
The incidence is going down,
okay,
but the actual absolute number is going up because we have a bigger population, we have
right,
an aging population. So those two facts, are linked to the fact that we have more cases now than we did 10 years ago. But the incidence, so the number of cases per 100,000 people is going down slightly, yes.
Then the part that, again, kind of stuck out to me, so we know about tobacco, we know what governments have done, we think based on that things are getting better, obviously, but then it says in the article, lung cancer remains the most prevalent cause of cancer.
Yes.
How do we explain that?
Not all lung cancers are caused by tobacco. That's the first thing. And we see that the incidence of types of lung cancer that is not linked to tobacco is actually going up. So we are, because we are seeing fewer of those cases that are linked to tobacco, we are having more of an evidence of the types of lung cancer that are not linked to tobacco. And the population that stopped smoking 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it still is still at higher risk of developing lung cancer than those who have never smoked. If you smoke one cigarette when you were a teenager, your risk was already increased. Clearly not as much as the one who's been smoking for 20 years, but it still remains that you have an increased risk of lung cancer for a very long period of time. And the campaigns that we had 20 years ago and the reduction that we're seeing over the last 10 years mainly is going to take years for us to be able to see a very marked reduction in those types of cancer.
And then what about the part that says, for whatever reason, maybe you can explain this, more females are expected to be diagnosed with lung cancer than males? Is that smoking related, or where would that be from?
Well, the women at some point started smoking more than men, smoking more actually, and being equal to men. And it probably seems that they are probably a bit more at risk if they are smoking of developing lung cancer. So this is probably a lesson learned that, you don't want to be equal to men in all aspects. In the aspects of cancer, women should not be more at risk of lung cancer, but it seems that actually they are, and that smoking is really not good for the female population.
A couple of other things in here as well. I mentioned you mentioned colorectal cancer, colon cancer, etc. And when I see the numbers go up, how much of this is because of early screening?
In terms of the
fact that we're able to pick this up earlier, or we're seeing this in the population.
Yeah, if we're picking up earlier, we're seeing the effects in terms of the reduction in mortality in breast cancer and colorectal cancer. And in fact, there are also initiatives in lung cancer that are not widespread in Canada. But if we are able to isolate a population that is more at risk, and if we're screening them, we're going to find the lung cancer at an earlier stage compared to what we usually see for lung cancer, which is already very advanced when we make the diagnosis. So in all three aspects, we're able to diagnose earlier and therefore to propose a life without cancer that is longer in all aspects.
Yeah, you've also, it's fun, as I read this, I'm like, I didn't even realize many of these different cancers that are here. It says there's been progress made when it comes to cervical, head and neck, pancreatic, uterine, and melanoma. Rates are increasing, but the diagnosing is getting better?
Sometimes it's the diagnosis that is getting better, that is more precise, so that we're able to adjust our therapy more specifically. But overall, for most types of cancer, we have now treatments that are much better than they were 20 years ago. So when I started practice 30 years ago, we were stuck with about 10 types of medication that we're using. Now there are probably hundreds that we can use, and especially in the context of immunotherapy, which came about 10 years ago and has been really a game changer in our battle against cancer. So we were usually initially using it for people with advanced cancer, showing that it had great effects. And now more and more we're using immunotherapy a bit earlier in the disease so that we're increasing the effect of the efficacy against cancer by treating not just the advanced cases, but also the early cases that are diagnosed, most of them by screening.
Just the one last thing before I wrap up, and we mentioned this, I know we've talked about this on the show before, the increase in breast cancer, and then the I guess suggestion was that governments perhaps readjust screening, because it used to be if you were 45 or 50 and over, and now we're finding out, as you just sort of alluded to a minute ago, that, the earlier we diagnose this, the better the chances of a good outcome. Are you getting support? Is that something governments are actually now beginning to understand?
It's the case everywhere in Canada. There has been a report in October saying that the government should go forward at least till the age of 45. But since October, the INES report, as well as the report by l'Institut National de Santé Publique, have not led to decisions and action to make sure that screening for breast cancer should happen earlier. And the same level of involvement by the government should be there as well for colorectal cancer, in which we have proof now that earlier diagnosis at the age of and screening at the age of 45 will lead to earlier diagnosis and reduction in the risk of death from this type of disease. So there needs to be intervention by the government to make sure that in Quebec we're acting the same way as everywhere else in Canada, and making sure that we're taking account of the fact that there are now more cases being diagnosed before the age of 50.
We will leave it at that. I thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Doctor. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dr. Denis Soulières on those cancer cases and the fact, and again, as he said, per capita, the numbers are going good. And then you look at just how many cases are still over the course of a year being reported, and hope that, in fact, governments are getting the message that screening needs to be happening earlier and earlier, and that's a good thing and not something we should be debating, I guess.
Hello, Canada.
This is Bryan Adams Radio. Hosted by Bryan Adams himself.
We'll play a few of mine, a ton of my favorites, and some must-hear behind-the-scenes stories from the world of rock and roll. One thing about doing rock and roll so long is you end up meeting a lot of the people that you admire. Sometimes you even get to work with them.
It's only love, and that's all. Bryan Adams Radio. I'm coming back to you. Now available on the free iHeartRadio app.
Hey everybody, how are you tonight? Sounds great.